Today, let's look at solving literal equations. So this is one of our first lessons where you might feel a little out of your element, kind of your first like real Algebra 1 lesson. So a formula, which you are probably familiar with, describes how two or more quantities are related. Formulas are important in many disciplines. Geometry, physics, economics, sports, and medicine are just a few examples of fields in which formulas are widely used. A formula is an example of a literal equation. A literal equation contains more than one variable. Literal equations and formulas can be solved for a specific variable using the same procedures as equations containing one variable. So far, probably in your history of mathematics courses, and so far in our class, we have been solving equations, but they've always had one letter or one variable. And you're good with that. You're going to be good with these two. Like it said, we are going to use the same procedures that we've been doing. So follow along. I have tons of examples for us so you can see every type of scenario that might come up on Delta Math or on test questions, okay? So let's look at number one. We're going to start off slow and we're going to slowly build up, okay? Number one, we're going to solve for A. I like to circle or sometimes draw an arrow at the letter that I'm solving for, just for my eyes to gravitate towards that. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but we are solving for capital letter A. If I want to get that A all by itself right now in the equation, it's G equals A divided by 4. I don't want it to be dividing by 4 anymore. I want it to be alone. So stop that division of 4, multiply both sides by 4. So that'll cancel out that denominator, that division. And now I have 4G equals A. I am finished. I am going to write one last step. I'm going to flip it over. So it says A equals 4G. I believe on Delta Math, when you get ready to type it in, it will already have like A equals and then the open box. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip it over and it's ready for you to input that final answer if this was your question on Delta Math. Okay. Let's go for number 2. Solve for A again, capital letter A. I'm going to circle it. We've got negative F plus A equals 3. I want to isolate that capital letter A on that left side of the equal sign. So the only thing I got to get rid of is a negative F. How could I get rid of a negative F? How could I make a negative F into a 0? Let's add F. Add F to both sides so that I have A equals 3 and F. You know this already. They're not like terms. I can't actually combine them. I'm just going to write them next to each other like that. 3 plus F. I'm done. I'm really done because it already says A equals 3 plus F. Now, could you have written A equals F plus 3? Yes. Addition is commutative. So if you wanted to write F plus 3, it would still be correct. Number 3, solve for lowercase h. Our equation says 4 equals h times n, right? Those are bumped up. H and n are bumped up, showing multiplication. So I don't want that to be multiplying any longer. I want to get h all by itself. So let's divide away the n. So divide both sides by n. On the left, now we have 4 divided by n equals h. And I'm done. I'm going to flip it over so that it says h equals 4 divided by n. Number 4, we're going to solve for capital letter A. Our equation says m equals A divided by B minus D squared. Now, A is being divided by all of that. So I'm going to add some parentheses just to emphasize that it's being divided by all of that. All of that is technically a group. And now that I've added the parentheses, maybe you can see that this could be an easier problem than maybe you initially thought. So just like one of our previous problems, we want it to stop dividing. We want to isolate the A, get rid of that denominator piece, the division piece. What can we do? Well, now that I added the grouping symbols, maybe you see we could just multiply both sides by that entire denominator piece, the B minus D squared. If you multiply both sides by that, on the right side, it'll cancel out. On the left, now I'm going to move that M to the front. We don't usually multiply a single thing at the back of our parentheses, so I'm going to move the M to the front of my parentheses. M times the quantity of B minus D squared equals capital letter A. Guess what? I'm done. I'm going to flip it over so that it says A equals M times the quantity B minus D squared. Now, if you had left the M behind the parentheses, it would still be right. Just make sure you're inputting it correctly in Delta Math so it knows that you're showing multiplication of the parentheses and then the M. But that's still correct too. Multiplication is also commutative. Number 5, solve for capital letter B. He's hiding right there. So in our equation, we got 1/5 of B equals D plus F. So this is an interesting one. Recall, we have 1/5 times B. So some of y'all might be thinking, oh, let's just divide away the 1/5. I hear you. I understand. But let's recall from earlier math, when we do want to divide a fraction by a fraction, what are we supposed to do instead? We actually change it to multiplication by the reciprocal, right? So instead, let me erase this. Let's not divide. Let's multiply by, what did I have? 5 over 1? That's 5. Multiply both sides by 5. Now, this other side, the right side, we have D and F. You would have to multiply both sides. And when we say multiply both sides, we mean everything on the other side. So I'm going to use some parentheses there to make our life a little bit easier. So on the left, the 5 times the 1/5 cancels out, and we have B equals, we have D plus F times 5. And I'm done, right? We were told isolate capital letter B, and I did that. If you want to distribute through, you want to write it as B equals 5D plus 5F. That's equivalent, and that is okay. Our goal was to get B all by itself, which we did by multiplying both sides by 5 and multiplying everything on both sides. So whether you use the parentheses or you distribute the 5 through, either way. Number 6, solve for lowercase a. He's all the way at the end. Our equation was D plus G equals 4 times H times A. All those three things are squished up next to each other. They're all multiplying. 4, H, and A, all multiplying. So if I'm trying to get the lowercase a by itself, just stop that multiplication, right? Well, you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We need to divide these away. Divide both of them away at one time. Divide both sides by 4H. Same thing here on this left side. This is D and G. If you want to throw parentheses around it, it's an entire group. We're dividing that entire group by 4H. So let's see what we have. D plus G divided by 4H equals lowercase a. I'm done. I'm just, for simplistic sake, going to flip it over. So it says lowercase a equals D plus G divided by 4H. Number 7, solve for lowercase a. Our equation M equals 5A plus 2F. This is looking more like a 2-step equation. We have 5A plus the 2F. We want to get rid of that extra term, the 2F, before we peel away the 5 coefficient. Okay, so get rid of the 2F, the extra term first. It's positive, so subtract 2F to the other side. On that left side, there was M, the minus 2F. They're not like terms. I can't actually combine them. So let's just write them next to each other. M minus 2F equals 5A. Now finish getting A isolated by dividing by the coefficient of 5 on both sides. And I think we're done. M minus 2F divided by 5 equals lowercase a. You could flip that over and it would say A equals M minus 2F divided by 5. You've isolated lowercase a. You've done it. Number 8, solve for capital letter D. Our capital letter D is inside our parentheses. We do have kind of a distributive property situation going on here. Go ahead and let's do that. I think for the most part, going ahead and distributing and simplifying is going to be a good step for you. Sometimes it's not helpful, but I think all of our examples in this lesson, it's going to be okay. If you go ahead and distribute, since so many of you are used to distributing, go ahead and distribute that 5 across and continue to isolate for capital letter D. So just like we did on the last problem, get rid of the extra term, not the 5D, get rid of the 5m squared. It's positive, so subtract 5m squared from both sides. On the left side, N and minus 5m squared are not like terms. You can't actually combine them. Just write them how you see them. N minus 5m squared equals 5d. Divide by the coefficient 5 and divide everything, right? We talked about that earlier. If you divide both sides, we mean everything. So give it a big division there. If you need to, you can put parentheses around the top, and we are done. Flipping it over would say d equals n minus 5m squared all divided by 5. Big division there, okay? Number 9, solve for capital letter A. He is sandwiched right there in the middle. On that left side, we got 1/2 A, F equals D. On that left side, the 1/2, the A, and the F are all squished and multiplying together, right? You can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Let's not. Because we need to do some multiplication. We need to do some division. Let's take it one step at a time. Let's get rid of the 1/2 coefficient first. It really doesn't matter, but we'll start with the 1/2. We talked about that earlier. Don't divide a fraction by a fraction. Multiply by the reciprocal instead. So multiply both sides by 2. That'll get rid of that fraction issue, and we'll have AF equals 2D. It is customary in mathematics to write a numerical coefficient and then a letter, right? So that's why I wrote 2D. Finish getting A by itself, divide away that F. We'll have capital letter A equals 2D divided by F. Final answer. Number 10, solve for A. There are 2 A's. Did you notice? There's 2 capital A's. So we are going to use a process called factoring, which we are going to learn a lot more about factoring in the next month or so. For now, think of factoring as backwards distributive property. You're going to create the distributive property. This was the result of that distributive property. So we're going to give ourselves some parentheses. There's going to be something on the outside. The thing on the outside in front of those parentheses is the thing they share in common, which is this capital letter A. Let's pull that out to the front of our parentheses. And what would be left is a G and a Q. Right? If you worked this back out, if you were to distribute, those would multiply back, GA and QA, when we did distributive property. So this is completely legal mathematics. And then on the right, we have our F. Now, what were we solving for? The A? Okay, now we have just one A. Life is so much better. So let's finish working this one. We were solving for A. Let's divide away this quantity of G plus Q on both sides. G plus Q. The G plus Q is going to cancel. We will have A equals F divided by G plus Q. If you have 2 letters, the letter that you're solving for, see if you can do this backwards distributive property. Again, it's called factoring, and you're going to learn all about factoring here pretty soon. And our last one, solve for lowercase d. Look at this problem. We have Q over R equals 8 over D. This is a proportion, and you would solve a proportion by cross multiplying. So go ahead and do that because we have a lot of issues going on. It would be a mess to try to divide both sides by D and then chase our D around these fractions. So let's go ahead and cross multiply, which is going to give us something like QD equals R times 8 or 8R. Okay, just cross multiply. And now we don't have to deal with fractions. That's a relief. We were solving for lowercase d. So let's finish that out. Get rid of that q. Divide by q on both sides. D equals 8r divided by q. Final answer. So that concludes our literal equations. Remember what I said at the very beginning. We were working our way up. I started off with really simple ones and worked our way up to the most complicated. There were several examples here, 11 problems that we worked together on purpose because there is such a variety on Delta Math, lots of different formulas or literal equations that you could see. So I wanted to make sure you got exposed to all of those in our video. Remember, you can pause, rewind, watch it 100 times if you want, but don't forget, you can ask me questions too. If you get stuck, I don't mind helping you, but you should probably have a similar example here in our lesson video. So give those a shot. This is your first kind of Algebra 1 lesson, equations with more than one variable using the same rules of equality that we've been using. So welcome to Algebra 1, guys. Let me know if you have questions. I'll see you in class.